Now, it's a great pleasure to introduce our next guest. A quite extraordinary person is joining us from Taiwan. Audrey Tang is the digital minister for the Taiwanese government, and she has quite a backstory herself. She made the 2019 list of 100 global thinkers published by Foreign Policy magazine. In 2016, she became the youngest ever Taiwan government minister at the age of 35, taking up office as the digital minister. She's in charge of helping government agencies communicate policy goals and managing information published by the government by both via digital means. She's one of the world's 20th most influential people in that topic of digital government. She's a free software programmer by way of background, and has been described as one of the 10 greats of Taiwanese computing personalities. She recently wowed the rest of the world with her leadership on the coronavirus crisis. And of course, of particular interest here is that Taiwan has been an enormous success story in terms of maintaining economic and social activity while keeping COVID-related deaths to a minimum. Audrey, welcome to the CIF annual conference. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to join us and our delegates. Maybe tell us a little bit about Taiwan, its population, its history. Give us it on a postage stamp, please.
Sure. Is the sound going through? Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay. My hearing of what you just said was less than perfect, but I got the gist of it. So really happy to be here virtually, and happy to introduce Taiwan. The island of Taiwan is about 400 kilometers long, a journey of 1.5 hours by high-speed rails, and we are a very young democracy. We had our first presidential election in 1996, which is when I was 15 years old. So for us, democracy is a new thing, because there's a saying that says anything we're born with is human nature, anything we're acquired is technology. So democracy for us, definitely a technology. So when the internet was taking off at the time, we had a fairly robust civil society, and we think of democracy as ways not just to upload 3 bits every 4 years, which is called voting, by the way, but also through day-to-day practices such as, well, petitions, sandboxes, participatory budget, the presidential hackathon, and the occasional occupy of the parliament. We occupied the parliament back in 2014 in protest of the Beijing deal about cross-strait service and trade agreement, because the MPs were refusing to deliberate, so people occupied their office to deliberate for them. That's the legitimacy theory anyway. But after 3 weeks of 500,000 people on the street and many more online, something really interesting happened, because the people managed to come to consensus, or rough consensus, rather than dissent. And people discovered that this demonstration is not a protest, but a demo of things to come, of what happens if we apply technologies that are pro-social media rather than anti-social media. And the consensus that's produced since then propelled Taiwan to, well, nowadays tackle the pandemic with no lockdown and the infodemic with no takedown. But more importantly, it shaped the open government, that's to say radically making the state transparent to the citizen, not the other way around, as the core philosophical value of Taiwan's present-day democracy. So that's just like a 3-minute overview.
And tell me about your economy. Would you describe it as an open market capitalist economy, a mixture of public and private sector? I mean, is it a great place to set up and start a business, or is there an entrepreneurial culture?
Right. Well, we're, according to the World Economic Forum, Taiwan is one of the 4 super innovators. So we're pretty good in terms of making sure that innovations have a role in the society. And we're running a very interesting system here where the healthcare is single payer, but the hospitals are not all nationalized. We make sure that communication broadband is a human right, but yet there's 5 competing telecoms. There's, of course, a very heavy kind of emphasis on getting the education and the other basic rights available to pretty much anybody. But on the other hand, the commercial sector is very strong as well. And so this is neither left-wing or right-wing. I'll call it it upwind maybe, just like Taiwan itself, the island is caught between the Eurasian plate on one side and the Philippine Sea plate on the other. So we're basically that necessitates the innovation because we don't want the either two data norms, that's surveillance capitalism on one side and statism, totalitarianism on the other, to take away our hard-earned democracy, not as long as people still remember the martial law, which wasn't long ago at all. It was like 30 years ago.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. It's quite a success story in your 30s. And we don't have many Irish software, free software programmers in the cabinet, in government. Tell us your own journey.
Sure. Yeah, the broadband as human right comes really handy. When I dropped out of the middle school when I was 15 years old, again, that's the year of the presidential election, that was 1996. I would tell the teacher and head of my school that I discovered that the future of human knowledge is being created on this new thing called the World Web. And my textbooks were all out of date. And so I told them I want to quit school and start my education on the web. And surprisingly, the head of my school just said, okay, we'll cover for you. And from now on, you don't have to go to school anymore, meaning they faked the record for me. So I've been hit with this interesting, very weird condition of thinking that public servants are the most innovative people ever since I was 15 years old. And I admit it's a strange condition, but it's also very true when I'm now the digital minister that I work with some of the most innovative people compared to, say, the time I worked with Apple for 6 years on Siri technologies or with the Oxford University Press on dictionaries. I mean, these are the industry and the academic innovation powerhouses, but still, I think the public service in Taiwan is very innovative. And so I think I'm mostly just putting into practice the ideas that I learned when I was 15 years old and started first of my series of startups. It's just rough consensus and civic participation and radical transparency. That's the core of the open multi-stakeholder political system that still powers the internet to this day. And that's like a 2-minute version of my own story.
Okay, so let's talk about what's termed citizen consensus and the decision-making process. Just explain to us how this participative democracy works, because we have, quite frankly, a lot of friction in our society. You know, people want new infrastructure, new developments, but they don't want new housing or development beside their back door. We have a situation where there's a lot of strife between, you know, different class politics, almost right and left, and the haves and have-nots. So, you know, it seems to us a little bit airy, and with a lot of vested interests, a little bit airy-fairy, this citizen consensus. Just how does it work?
Sure. And for that, I would like to share a little bit of my screen. Can you see this Lego block thing that says digital social innovation?
Yes, we can see it, yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think a couple of examples will really help. So I will start with one. That's our digital social innovation pillar, one of the 3 pillars that's called fast, fair, and fun, respectively. And the fast part pertains to collective intelligence. That is to say, people working to warn each other of the COVID that was not called COVID, it was simply called SARS again, when Dr. Li Wenliang, the PRC whistleblower, shared that on the social media last December. We have a system here called the PTT that's run by the National Taiwan University entirely in the social sector, not advertisement fueled. So it's more of a pro-social media, but still just like a Reddit in the US internet, there's a lot of people who take a very close eye on the so-called whistleblowing of the 7 SARS cases for Dr. Li Wenliang. And like within hours, it gets upvoted. But instead of like Dr. Li Wenliang, who faced discipline for disrupting the harmony, we immediately escalated to the medical officers, and we started health inspections for all 5 passengers from Wuhan to Taiwan the very next day, which happened to be the first day of 2020. And so this demonstrates to me 2 things. First, that according to the Civicus Monitor, Taiwan is the most open in terms of freedom of speech, assembly, and so on in all of Asia, and one of the only two completely open if you count New Zealand from the Pacific. And so the people must trust each other and the freedom of speech a lot when they can openly debate about the SARS 2.0, as it were, last December. And the government also takes it very seriously and basically works with the citizen, not just for the citizens, immediately to set up this toll-free number. And this toll-free number, I would say, is the backbone of a series of communication devices such as chatbots and so on. But really, anyone with a landline can just dial 1922 and inform the Central Epidemic Command Center, which has the Quint, the 5 people, medical officers, having press conferences every 2 p.m. for many, many days. And it ranges from answering frequently answered questions, such as what's the mask good for, to reporting new social innovations, such as there was a young boy who called back in April that said, I don't want to go to school because you're rationing mask, and all I get was pink medical mask. I was afraid that my classmate may laugh at me. The very next day on the live stream, all the medical officers wore pink medical masks. So, and the Minister Chen Shizhong for Health and Welfare said that Pink Panther was his childhood hero. And so the boy became the most hip boy of the class because only he has color that the heroes wear. And that's a 24-hour response cycle. And why do we wear a mask anyway? Well, there's a cute spokes dog named Song Chai from the companion animal of the engagement officer or participation officer that we have in each and every ministry. And so it basically distributes the physical distancing signs, like when you're outdoor, keep 2 Shiba Inus away, indoor 3 Shiba Inus away. Remember to cover your mouth and nose when sneezing. Don't do what the Shiba Inu does. And remember to wear your mask, because what's good mask for? Well, a mask protects you against your own unwashed hands. And so this is a communication strategy that adds the R value of the good ideas. This makes the idea worth spread. And that is what we call the humor over rumor. But most importantly, because people remain calm and collected during the pandemic, they can join on those mask rationing strategies very easily with a end of what we call GovZero, which is a bunch of what we call civic technologists that looks at all the government services, which in Taiwan all ends in .gov.tw, and make alternatives, and that ends with .g0v.tw. So just changing an O to a 0 in your browser, and you get into the shadow government. That's always more fun, and always explore the alternatives of digital service. For example, in early February, there was this map that shows all your nearby pharmacies, how many masks are available there. That's entirely built by the social sector. And all I did was talk to the premier or prime minister and say, we need to trust them with the open data and share with the national health insurance data every 30 seconds. So people queuing in line can swipe their national health card and see that the mask availability in that pharmacy, like for adults, dropped from 58 to 49 after they made a purchase, because it's 9 every 2 weeks for adults, or 10 if you're a child. And the point here is that people queuing in line can keep each other and the system accountable. It's not about a open data that's published every day. It's about an open API that's verified across a kind of distributed ledger of more than 100 different tools, and that allows people to analyze the distribution and point out oversupply or undersupply. So the idea is co-creation with the people, not just for the people. That's one simple demo using the COVID as an example.
What was the point about humor over rumor?
Right. The importance of humor over rumor is that during the pandemic, people often feel anxious. They will fill in whatever question that needs answer. If there is no timely answer, then maybe conspiracy theories. And so the idea of humor over rumor is the simple observation that if people see something fun, something that's humorous, after they feel outrage, it actually makes outrage dissipate and turn it into creative energy. And if they see something fun before they see the conspiracy theory, it inoculates, vaccinates the people against outrage. And so I'll just use very quick example. There was a time, also in April, I think, where there was a rumor that said, and I quote, tissue papers are going to run out soon because we nationalized mass production and all the material that's going to be made for tissue papers are being confiscated to make masks. Of course, that's not true. They're entirely different materials, but people do run out and they do panic buy. And so our premier, which you can see here, Premier Su Zhenchang, wrote this meme that's a trendy internet picture out not even 2 hours after the trending rumor, and in which he just, I don't know, shakes his bottom a little bit and say in very large font that each of us only have a pair of bottoms because it's a wordplay in Mandarin. To stockpile twin sounds the same as bottom twin. And so it's hilarious. And so people are more likely to remember that tissue papers are made out of South American materials and medical masks out of domestic material. And they're definitely very different things. And so after just a couple of days of this spreading and the conspiracy theory being, not spreading as much as this one really has a very high R value. People stop panic buying and it returned to normal. And a few weeks after that, when there was another rumor that talks about instant noodles running out, a very similar humor appears, and the premier says there's endless supply of instant noodle, buy as much as you want, but don't forget to add vegetables. And all the municipal mayors and county mayors just piled on it with their whatever local agricultural highlights they want to highlight. So it becomes a very festive thing. And again, people feel more calm and collected after this humorous approach.
Indeed, it is well scripted humor. So look, I get the overall point of a culture of open communications between society and government. I get the application of the most advanced technology. But we have, for example, and when you get down to the nitty-gritty, it brings it home. So we would have vexatious questions of which there's a lot of friction in society on a localized and national basis. For example, height restrictions in the capital. People don't want skyscrapers beside them. Planning in terms of localized objectors. We had a national sort of campaign in relation to paying domestic water charges. And we have used the citizen assembly to deal with issues like a constitutional referendum on abortion. Is there a way of kind of diffusing vexatious questions by taking a Taiwanese approach?
Yes, definitely. And we can help there too. So I'd like to show you my office. This is literally my office, the Social Innovation Lab, and people kind of automatically become creative when they step into it, inspired by these public arts from people with trisomy differences, with Down syndrome. Turns out they're brilliant artists and see the world from a very creative angle. We also have like Mayor from Prague, who along with his team just climbed on those public installations. I didn't know that it's climbable, but they show it definitely is. And also it allows people who show up with their, I don't know, dogs and self-driving vehicles, these are self-driving vehicles, to explore the digitization, innovation, governance, and inclusion pillars of their creation, because I'm always there. I walk to that place, 15 minutes walk every morning and evening, and every Wednesday is my office hour. Everybody's welcome to have a conversation with me on record. That's the only thing I require. And so people just demonstrated that if you always talk about this seemingly zero-sum things, but always on the record, then it's actually easier for people to find the common ground to, for example, work in a sandbox. And that's an idea, I think, originally from the UK, but we apply it, generalize it to outside fintech. So anyone can just share an idea, and through 3 months of working, it could be telehealthcare, it could be self-driving vehicles, it could be crowdsourced environmental sensing projects, the air box and water boxes and so on. But the idea is that every year the president hands out those trophies, 5 of those trophies every year. And for the 5 teams that went through the prototyping stage, they received a trophy, which is a micro projector that when turned on, it shows the president herself handing the trophy to the team, promising whatever they did in the past 3 months, and that's okayed by the three sectoral team, that's the public, private, and the social sector, will become national policy in the next 12 months. So in the 3 past years that we run this presidential hackathon, we basically shape those seemingly zero-sum games into data collaboratives, which people can always add in. So I already showed the mask availability map, but that builds upon the existing weather and air quality and so on sensing team from the primary schools and so on. And this is the PM 2.5 level as measured by the primary schools and people who donate their balconies and so on in a distributed ledger. So this is what we say a digital competence curriculum, not a digital literacy curriculum. That is to say, we make sure that people are able to create, to produce data and narratives rather than just being consumers of narratives, and aimed with such data competence, they can then analyze what's going on. When, for example, in 2015, we introduced the AI-powered conversation method, POLIS, which is now has its own top-level domain in our government as polis.gov.tw. You can see a recent consultation at Citizens Assembly that is crowdsourced its agenda on ocean policy @/ocean. But in 2015, the first time this has been applied is on the UberX issue, where you can see my friends and families on social media are basically all over the place when it comes to the position, when it comes to UberX. And we always start with the facts and asking people to crowdsource their feelings. And finally, we ideate face to face. And the idea that take care of the most people's feelings are the best ideas. And the experience is really simple. You see one fellow feeling from your fellow citizen saying that the passenger liability insurance was very important. And if you agree, you can be moving closer to me. If you disagree, you move farther away from me. And then you see another sentiment, unless, of course, you want to contribute your own for other people to vote. But there's no reply button, so there's no room for troll to grow. And every time after we run this like 3-week-long conversations, and this may be the most important slide I'm going to show in this talk, you see the usual ideology field statements like what's a sharing economy, is carpooling sharing or whatever. But actually, most people agree with most of the things on most of their neighbors' positions most of the time, on registration, on insurance, on fair road use, and things like that. And these are the consensus statements that we then hold as agenda. So even for the seemingly ideological issues, if you can table this a little bit and move on first to the more nuanced, eclectic formulations of these. For example, this conversation was in Bowling Green, Kentucky, and no matter whether people identify as Democrat or Republican, everybody agreed that we need to put the arts into the science, technology, engineering, and math education. That's like the top priority for all the constituents in that city. And so if people get into the habit of seeing the polity as having actually much more rough consensus than the anti-social media platforms would often lead people believe, there's more agency in people to apply their competence and storytelling and so on into a more nuanced conversation that could then get through some easy wins, and then after which we're much more able to tackle the more structural issues.
Finally, let's move to the topic of the moment, COVID. So we, along with other European countries, are in the midst, as we move towards perhaps a second surge, and fatigue with the lockdown and so on, a kind of inherent debate in society. On one hand, people saying, look, we've got to live with this, the economy's been irreparably damaged, social life of young people is just too restrictive. And then on the other side, simply the public health mantra of saving lives and therefore restricting movements. So you kind of have the Swedish model on one side, followed by, other models like New Zealand and so on. Taiwan has one of the lowest deaths of 0.03 deaths per 100,000, and yet has kept its economy and society open. Is that correct? And how have you achieved that?
Yeah. I think the most important thing is just to make sure very early on that people understand wearing mask and hand sanitation is protecting themselves from their own unwashed hands. because this requires nothing of a collectivist sort of thought, nothing altruistic. It's just a very simple matter of protecting oneself against unwashed hands. The numeric models show very early on that if we can get 3/4 of citizens understand the science and just wearing masks and washing their hands, we do not have to go to a lockdown, and we did not. And nowadays, we're like 5 months post-COVID now. We've reopened pretty much all the concerts, halls, and movies and so on. Of course, people still go to the tens of thousands of people concerts wearing masks. But the idea is that if we understand the science together, then people can innovate together. And this even extends to unlikely places, such as I remember there was one case where there was a staff from an intimate bar were diagnosed with COVID. And in space like that, of course, the employees are very sensitive to privacy. So she did not collaborate with the contact tracing on the very first day. And in terms of pandemic prevention, of course, providing reliable information is very important. So there was a lot of legitimacy in government if we invoke sanctions and so on, but we did not. We simply said that instead of forcing them to go underground, like in the prohibition era in the US, we basically said if they can implement a simple, practical, real contact system, as long as people can be effectively contact, there's no real name necessary, and understanding the scientific crux, the social distancing, then they can still remain open. And so because of that, nightclubs and intimate bars develop creative approaches such as leaving code names, single-use emails, prepaid mobile phone numbers, providing hats with plastic shields to maintain distancing, and so on. So even it sounds very ridiculous. They consider themselves part of the national team in joining the fight against the pandemic. And so that garnered us even more social trustworthiness than a forced sanction or lockdown ever could. So basically, the government trusting its citizens and making itself and the science transparent to the citizens, I think, is the most important thing in the Taiwan model.
Well, I want to thank you for a most fascinating insight into Taiwan society, Taiwan government, and the consultative democratization of decision-making. Our international guest speaker today at the CIF annual conference, a digital minister for the Taiwanese government, Audrey Tang. Thank you for joining us from Taipei, and we wish you personally and collectively every continued success, both at society and at a political level. Thank you indeed for joining us.